Jason had always enjoyed the quiet routine of his mornings. The early light filtering through the trees, the crisp air as he watered the plants in his front yard. It was a peaceful ritual. The neighborhood was calm at this hour, with most people either at work or still inside, savoring their coffee. It was why the sound of hurried, angry footsteps approaching his driveway immediately set off alarm bells in his mind. He straightened from where he had been kneeling, wiping his hands on his jeans as he turned to see who was approaching. A woman he had never seen before was marching toward him with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested she was here for a confrontation. Her blonde hair was pulled into a tight, overly lacquered bob, and she wore a beige pantsuit that looked more suited for a corporate boardroom than a suburban street. But it wasn't her appearance that caught Jason's attention. It was the expression on her face, a twisted mix of smug entitlement and righteous fury, as if she had already decided she was the victor in whatever battle she was about to wage. Before Jason could even greet her, she came to a stop just a few feet away, planted her hands on her hips, and, with no preamble, barked, "I need you to hand over the keys to the house, now." Jason blinked. He was certain he had misheard her. He let out a short laugh, expecting some kind of clarification, maybe an apology for the bizarre demand. But the woman's face remained hard, expectant, as if she was waiting for him to comply without question. "Excuse me?" Jason said, his voice measured. "I think you might have the wrong house." The woman scoffed. "No, I have the right house. I own this property now, and you are trespassing. So, unless you want me to call the cops, I suggest you hand over the keys and get your things out before I have you removed." Jason stared at her, waiting for the punchline. But there was no flicker of amusement in her expression, no indication that this was a mistake or a misunderstanding. She was deadly serious. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Lady, I've lived here for 10 years. This is my house. You're the one who's trespassing." The woman huffed, fishing into her oversized designer handbag and pulling out a stack of papers. She flipped through them dramatically before holding them up like a winning poker hand. "Then why," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "do I have the official property deed right here that says otherwise?" Jason crossed his arms, unimpressed. "Because that's obviously fake." Her eyes widened in theatrical outrage. "Fake? Are you seriously accusing me of fraud? I have legally purchased this home, and if you don't leave now, I will have you arrested for squatting." Jason rubbed his temples. He had dealt with annoying neighbors before. Complaints about fence heights, parking space disputes, even an homeowner association representative who once tried to fine him for a flower bed that was supposedly too colorful. But this was something else entirely. "And where, exactly," Jason asked, keeping his tone deliberately slow and calm, "did you buy this house from?" Karen lifted her chin defiantly. "It was a private sale, a very exclusive deal. The seller said I had to act fast before someone else grabbed it." Jason pinched the bridge of his nose. Oh, this was bad. This woman had been scammed, and now she was taking it out on him. "Look, lady, Karen, of course," Jason sighed. "Karen, I don't know who sold you that deed, but you've been conned. This is my house. I have the actual deed, mortgage statements, utility bills, whatever you need to prove that I'm the real owner. But you just got played." Karen's face turned an alarming shade of red. "How dare you insinuate that I'm stupid?" Jason rolled his eyes. "I didn't say that. You're lying. You're just some low-light squatter who refuses to accept that your free ride is over." She pointed a manicured finger at the house, her voice rising. "I paid for this property. I own it. And you're a criminal. I bet you forged those documents just to stay here illegally." Jason couldn't believe what he was hearing. This woman had the audacity to show up on his property with a fake deed and was now accusing him of fraud. He had half a mind to grab his own paperwork just to shut her up, but something told him that wouldn't work. Karen wasn't here for logic. Karen was here for control. "All right," Jason said, folding his arms. "If you're so sure about this, why don't we call the cops? I'll show them my paperwork, you show them yours, and we'll see what they say." For the first time, Karen hesitated. A flicker of doubt crossed her face before she scowled. "You think you can intimidate me? I was going to let you leave peacefully, but you forced my hand." Before Jason could stop her, she whipped out her phone and punched in 3 numbers. 911, what's your emergency?" Karen's voice turned sickly sweet, but loud enough for all the neighbors to hear. "Hello, yes, I'd like to report a violent squatter who's refusing to leave my property. He's being aggressive, and I fear for my safety." Jason felt his stomach drop. He opened his mouth to argue, but Karen shot him a triumphant glare, as if daring him to interrupt. He exhaled sharply. This was about to become a nightmare. Jason stood in stunned silence as Karen continued her dramatic 911 call, her voice laced with panic and manufactured fear. "Yes, I'm at my house and there's a man who won't leave. He's yelling at me and acting aggressively. I don't feel safe. Please send someone quickly." Jason could hear the dispatcher asking her questions, but Karen wasn't giving them a chance to respond. She was rambling, exaggerating every detail to make herself sound like a helpless victim. "He's refusing to leave, and I'm scared he might have a weapon. I don't know what he's capable of." Jason clenched his jaw. A weapon? She was straight up lying to the police now. His hands curled into fists, but he forced himself to take a deep breath. Losing his temper wouldn't help. If anything, it would just make him look guilty when the cops arrived. Karen shot him a triumphant smirk as she spoke. "Yes, I'll stay on the line. Please hurry." Then she ended the call and crossed her arms, staring him down. Jason exhaled slowly. "You just told the cops I have a weapon. That's a felony. False reporting." Karen shrugged. "You shouldn't have been so threatening to me." Jason let out a short, humorless laugh. "Threatening? I've done nothing but stand here while you trespass on my property, scream at me, and call the police with a fake story. You do realize you're the one committing crimes right now." Karen scoffed. "You're just mad because you're finally getting what you deserve." Jason stared at her, shaking his head. He had met plenty of entitled people in his life, but this woman was next-level delusional. He could see it in her eyes. She genuinely believed she was in the right. She was so convinced by whatever scam she had fallen for that she'd rather double down and get an innocent person arrested than admit she'd been tricked. The distant wail of sirens cut through the air. Karen's smirk widened. "Looks like your little squatter days are over." Jason sighed and pulled his phone from his pocket. If Karen wanted to play this game, fine. He wasn't about to let her twist the narrative. He hit record and aimed the camera at her. "So, just to clarify," Jason said, keeping his voice calm and even, "you're standing on my property, claiming I'm a squatter, and you just called the cops saying I have a weapon. Do you still want to stick to that story?" Karen's smug expression faltered for a split second before she lifted her chin. "I don't have to explain myself to you." Jason arched an eyebrow. "No? Because I have a feeling you'll be doing a lot of explaining when the cops get here." The sirens grew louder. 2 police cruisers turned onto the street and screeched to a stop right in front of Jason's house. He took a step back, raising his hands slightly, not because he'd done anything wrong, but because he knew how these things could go. Karen, on the other hand, immediately launched into a full-blown performance. "Officers, thank God you're here." She rushed toward the nearest cop, a middle-aged man with a stern face. "This dangerous man broke into my house and is refusing to leave. He's been yelling at me, threatening me. I don't know what he might do next." Jason didn't miss the way she glanced back at him as she spoke, her lips twitching in amusement. She thought she'd already won. The second officer, a younger woman with a sharp, assessing gaze, approached Jason. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step over here," she said firmly. Jason took a slow breath and did as she asked, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Officer, I live here. This is my home. That woman is a trespasser who just made a false police report." The officer frowned. "You have proof of residency?" Jason gestured toward the house. "Inside. I have the original deed, mortgage documents, utility bills, whatever you need." Meanwhile, Karen was still spinning her web of lies. He's just saying that. I bought this house weeks ago, and now he won't leave. I have all the paperwork." She shoved her stack of documents toward the older officer, who took them and began flipping through them with a skeptical expression. The female officer glanced at Jason. "Do you have any ID on you?" Jason nodded and pulled his wallet from his pocket, handing over his driver's license. "My address is right there." The officer took it, examining the card before glancing at Karen's paperwork. "Ma'am, where exactly did you purchase this house from?" Karen puffed up her chest. "It was a private deal. The seller contacted me directly. It was a limited-time offer, cash only. I wired the money, and they sent me the deed." The older officer's eyebrows lifted. "Cash only?" Karen nodded, oblivious to how ridiculous she sounded. "It was a steal, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. That's why I acted fast." The officers exchanged glances. Jason could see it on their faces. They knew. The younger officer turned back to him. "Sir, you mentioned having paperwork inside. Would you be willing to retrieve it?" Jason nodded. "Absolutely. Do you want to come with me?" She hesitated, then nodded. "That would be best." Jason led the way inside, grabbing his actual deed, mortgage statements, and a few pieces of recent mail addressed to him. When they returned outside, he handed the documents over. The older officer compared Jason's paperwork to Karen's. It only took him a few seconds to notice the discrepancies. Karen's so-called deed was a low-quality photocopy with obvious signs of digital manipulation. The signatures didn't match the legal records, and the so-called seller was an untraceable name. The officer looked up at Karen, his jaw tightening. "Ma'am, do you have any proof of your purchase? Emails? A contract? A point of contact for the seller?" Karen's smile flickered. "The seller said they handled all the legal stuff themselves. They told me everything was transferred over and I just needed to show my deed to claim the house." The officers exchanged glances again. The male officer sighed and rubbed his forehead. "Ma'am, you've been scammed." Karen's face twisted. "Excuse me? This deed isn't real. This house is still legally owned by Mr. Bennett here." He gestured toward Jason. "Whoever sold you this property took your money and disappeared. There is no legal transfer of ownership." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. No, that's not possible. I paid good money for this house. He has to leave. I own it." The younger officer sighed. "Ma'am, I need you to take a deep breath and process what we're saying. You were defrauded. This property is not yours." Karen's expression darkened. "I don't accept that. I paid for this house. It's mine." Jason shook his head. "Jesus Christ, you're in denial." Karen turned to him, her face contorted with rage. "This is your fault. If you had just left when I told you to, none of this would be happening." Jason laughed in disbelief. "Lady, you seriously thought you could just show up, flash some fake papers, and take my house?" Karen's eyes burned with hatred, but the officers had lost their patience. "Ma'am," the male officer said firmly, "I'm going to need you to step off this property. Now." Karen didn't move, her hands clenched into fists. "No, I'm not leaving. He's the fraud. He's the one who should be arrested." Jason could see where this was going. Karen wasn't about to walk away quietly. This was about to escalate, and he was going to enjoy watching it happen. Karen's face twisted in rage as she stood her ground, her feet firmly planted on Jason's driveway. The officers had given her a direct order to leave, but she wasn't budging. If anything, the more reality set in, the more she seemed determined to resist it. Jason crossed his arms, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of amusement and exasperation. She was digging her own grave at this point. The older officer, clearly having dealt with stubborn cases before, let out a slow breath and adjusted his belt. "Ma'am, I'll repeat myself one more time. This is not your property. You need to step off of it now, or we will have no choice but to remove you." Karen's eyes darted between the officers, then back to Jason. There was a flicker of something in her expression, something desperate. She knew she was losing, but instead of backing down, she did something even more insane. "You're all in on it, aren't you?" she suddenly shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at Jason before swinging it toward the officers. You're working together to scam me out of my home. He paid you off." Jason blinked. "What?" The younger officer, who had been patiently giving Karen a chance to cooperate, narrowed her eyes. "Excuse me?" Karen jabbed a finger at Jason's house. "This is corruption. I paid for this house, and now you're covering for this criminal. You're supposed to serve the people, but instead you're protecting a scammer." The older officer rubbed his temple. "Ma'am, this is not corruption. This is reality. You were scammed. That doesn't make this house yours. Now, if you don't leave—" Karen cut him off with a dramatic gasp. "Oh my God! You're going to arrest me, aren't you?" She clasped a hand over her chest as if she had just uncovered some grand conspiracy. "You're going to silence me because I know the truth." Jason let out a short laugh, unable to stop himself. "Lady, what is wrong with you?" Karen snapped her head toward him. "You! This is your doing. You saw I was a single woman just trying to claim what was rightfully mine, and you decided to take advantage of me. You're probably one of those fraudsters that prey on innocent buyers. I bet you forged your deed." Jason rolled his eyes. "For the last time, this is my house. You fell for an obvious scam. That's on you." Karen's expression twisted with frustration, and then, before anyone could react, she turned and made a break for the front door. Jason's stomach lurched as she sprinted up his porch steps, fumbling with the doorknob like she could somehow force her way inside. The officers shouted after her, but Karen had lost whatever shred of sanity she had left. She slammed her shoulder against the door, trying to push it open. When that didn't work, she reached into her bag and pulled out what looked like a key. Jason's eyes widened. She actually thought she had a key? "Are you serious right now?" Jason called out, half in disbelief. "You really think that's going to work?" Karen jammed the key into the lock, twisting it with force, but of course it didn't fit. She gritted her teeth, trying again and again, as if the sheer power of her delusion would make it work. That was enough for the officers. The younger one rushed forward and grabbed Karen's arm just as she reared back, ready to kick the door. "That's it," the officer snapped. "You're under arrest for trespassing and attempted unlawful entry." Karen shrieked as the officer spun her around and pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "No! No, this isn't happening!" The older officer moved in to assist, helping secure the cuffs around her wrists as she continued thrashing. "This is my house. You're all criminals. You'll hear from my lawyer," she wailed, but her voice cracked with panic. Jason leaned against the porch railing, watching the entire scene unfold with a level of satisfaction he hadn't expected. "Good luck with that, Karen," he said dryly. "Make sure your lawyer is as real as your deed." Karen turned her head to shoot daggers at him, but she was too busy being restrained to do much more than spit venomous words. "I hope you rot in prison for this. You'll regret messing with me." The younger officer led her down the steps as the older one retrieved Karen's purse, which had fallen in the chaos. As they approached the patrol car, Karen suddenly seemed to realize what was happening. Wait, please," she gasped, twisting to look at the officers with wide, panicked eyes. "You don't understand. I'm the victim." The younger officer sighed as she opened the back door of the squad car. "You can explain everything at the station, ma'am." Karen dug her heels into the pavement. "No, I was tricked. I was scammed. You're making a mistake. I'm the one who needs help." Jason smirked. "Oh, so now you admit it?" Karen shot him a hateful glare before turning back to the officers, desperate. "Please, I just need time to figure this out. You can't arrest me. I didn't do anything wrong." The older officer shook his head. "Ma'am, you trespassed, attempted to force entry into a private residence, and falsely reported a crime. That is doing something wrong." Karen's face crumpled. "But I paid for this house." Jason crossed his arms. "Yeah? Maybe next time don't buy real estate off some shady website." Karen opened her mouth to argue, but the officer had had enough. He guided her into the back of the squad car, shutting the door with finality. Jason let out a breath, shaking his head. "Well, that was insane." The younger officer turned to him. "We'll need you to come down to the station later to give a statement. Shouldn't take long." Jason nodded. "No problem." The older officer gave him a measured look. "If she contacts you again, let us know immediately." Jason snorted. I have a feeling she'll be too busy trying to dig herself out of the legal hole she'd just jumped into. The officers exchanged a glance before nodding. Then, with that, they returned to their cruiser. Jason watched as they pulled away, taking Karen and her delusions with them. As the sound of sirens faded, Jason finally exhaled, rubbing his temples. What a day. He turned back to his house, shaking his head as he walked up the steps. He had dealt with his fair share of crazy people before, but this was one for the record books. Jason stood on his porch, watching the last of the police lights fade into the distance. The neighborhood was quiet again, but his heart was still pounding. The adrenaline rush from the confrontation had left him buzzing, and he wasn't sure if he was more furious or amused by what had just happened. Karen had been arrested, hauled off kicking and screaming, but something told him that this wasn't over. People like her didn't just accept defeat. They found ways to make things worse. With a sigh, he stepped back inside, locking the door behind him. He needed to sit down, maybe grab a drink and process everything. He had barely made it to the kitchen when his phone buzzed. A no number. Jason frowned. He normally ignored calls from numbers he didn't recognize, but after today, curiosity got the better of him. He hesitated for a moment before swiping to answer. Hello? A deep sigh came from the other end, followed by a male voice, smooth and overly polite. Is this Jason Bennett? Jason's grip on the phone tightened. Who's asking? My name is Richard Lawson. I'm an attorney representing Karen Montgomery. Jason rolled his eyes. Of course she had a lawyer, Lawson continued, his tone still carefully measured. I'd like to discuss the matter regarding her recent arrest. I believe there's been a misunderstanding, and I'd like to work toward a resolution that benefits all parties involved. Jason let out a dry laugh. Oh, there's no misunderstanding. She trespassed on my property, tried to break into my house, and called the cops on me for something she made up. What exactly do you think needs resolving? There was a pause. Mr. Bennett, my client is a victim of fraud. She was led to believe that she had legally purchased your home. I understand that this situation has been frustrating for you, but she acted based on the information she was given. Given the circumstances, I think it would be best if we handled this matter civilly, Jason scoffed. Civilly? She tried to steal my house and got herself arrested. What exactly are you asking me to do? I was hoping we could come to an agreement that would allow my client to avoid legal trouble. If you were to drop the charges, Jason nearly choked on his laughter. Are you kidding me? You want me to drop the charges after she tried to force her way into my home? I understand your frustration, Lawson said smoothly, but consider this. Karen was deceived. She lost a substantial amount of money in this fraudulent transaction. She's already suffered enough. Jason gritted his teeth. Not my problem. Perhaps not, Lawson replied, his tone still maddeningly calm. But I believe there's room for negotiation. My client is willing to compensate you for your trouble. Jason's patience snapped. Compensate me? Buddy, no amount of money is going to make me let a woman who tried to illegally evict me from my own home walk free like nothing happened. She lied to the cops, she trespassed, she wasted everyone's time, and now she wants to throw cash at me to make it go away? Not happening. Another pause. This time there was a slight shift in Lawson's tone. Less polite, more calculating. Mr. Bennett, I was hoping we could settle this amicably, but if you insist on pursuing legal action, my client will be forced to take countermeasures. Jason arched an eyebrow. Is that a threat? Not at all, Lawson said. Just an observation. If this case goes to court, it will become a public matter. The media loves stories like this. Big bad homeowner refuses to show mercy to a woman who was conned out of her life savings. My client is prepared to tell her side of the story, and I assure you, it will not paint you in a favorable light. Jason inhaled sharply. He hadn't expected this. Karen wasn't just going to fade into the background. She was going to play the victim. Lawson continued, his voice smooth as ever. So, Mr. Bennett, I ask you, what's more important to you, principle or peace of mind? Jason clenched his jaw, gripping the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. Every instinct told him to tell this guy to shove it, to let Karen and her ridiculous story burn in court. But another part of him, the logical part, knew that even if she was in the wrong, public perception could still work against him. People loved a sob story. He took a slow breath. "I'll think about it," Lawson exhaled, sounding satisfied. "That's all I ask. I'll be in touch." The call ended. Jason set the phone down and ran a hand through his hair. He had been right. This wasn't over. Karen wasn't just some delusional woman who made a mistake. She was a problem, and he had no doubt she was about to make his life a whole lot worse. Jason sat at his kitchen table, staring at his phone in disgust. The conversation with Karen's lawyer still echoed in his mind, each word tightening the knot in his stomach. He had expected Karen to go down kicking and screaming, but this was something else. She wasn't just trying to get out of trouble. She was trying to turn the tables on him, and the worst part, it might actually work. He knew how these things played out. The truth didn't always matter. The story did. And if Karen was smart enough or just crazy enough, she could spin this into a sob story that made him the villain. The single woman scammed out of her dream home, bullied by an unforgiving homeowner. It was absurd, but absurdity didn't stop people from believing things if they were framed just the right way. He needed to be ready. With a sharp breath, Jason stood and grabbed his laptop. If Karen was going to play dirty, so would he. The next morning, Jason woke up to a flood of notifications. His phone buzzed endlessly on his nightstand, and when he groggily reached for it, his stomach sank. Karen had gone public. Her face was plastered all over social media, her story making rounds in local news articles. The headline made him want to punch a hole in the wall. "Woman left homeless after ruthless squatter refuses to leave property she purchased." Jason skimmed the article, his pulse pounding in his ears. Karen had done exactly what she had threatened. The story painted her as an innocent victim, a hard-working woman who had saved up for years to finally own a home, only to have her dreams stolen by a man who refused to leave. She claimed she had done everything legally, had all the proper documents, but Jason had used loopholes to fight back. It was a complete fabrication. The comments under the post made his blood boil. Disgusting. How do people like him sleep at night? Women work so hard and this is what they get? The system is broken. Throw that freeloader out. Jason clenched his jaw. Karen knew what she was doing. She knew exactly what kind of outrage buttons to push, and it was working, but she had underestimated him. Jason sat down at his desk and got to work. He pulled up every document he had, his mortgage papers, his official deed, every bill proving he had lived here for years. He compiled everything into a file and then went a step further. He uploaded the full police report from the night Karen was arrested. Then he crafted his own response. The truth about the woman who claims I stole her house. He laid it all out. Every fact, every receipt. The reality that Karen had fallen for an obvious scam, refused to believe it, and then broke into his home and lied to the police about him being armed. He included a clip from his security camera that showed her trying to force the key into his door. Then he posted it. And waited. By the afternoon, Jason's post had taken on a life of its own. The first wave was disbelief. People who had initially sided with Karen started asking questions. Wait, why is there actual video footage of her breaking in? If she legally owned the house, why did the police arrest her? Then came the backlash. Wow, I believed her at first, but she's just straight up lying. Classic scammer behavior. She gets tricked and then tries to steal the house for real. Hope she enjoys jail. By evening, the local news stations that had run Karen's story had updated their headlines. Some had quietly taken their articles down. Others issued half-hearted corrections. Karen's lawyer called him again. This time, Jason didn't pick up. He didn't need to. Karen had been counting on public sympathy to bail her out. But once the truth came out, that sympathy turned into outrage. Not against Jason, against her. Her name was everywhere, but not in the way she had hoped. Entitled woman tries to steal home after falling for scam, gets arrested instead. Liar exposed. Woman's fake homeowner story falls apart after security footage proves the truth. The same people who had been defending her were now tearing her apart. Hope she gets sued for this. Dude should press charges. Imagine the level of audacity it takes to fail a scam and then try to make someone else suffer for it. She literally tried to break in. How did she think this was going to end? By the next day, Karen's social media accounts had gone private. Her lawyer stopped calling. The reporters who had been so eager to tell her version of events were suddenly nowhere to be found. And Jason? He walked out onto his porch, sipping his morning coffee, and let out a slow breath. It was over. She had tried. She had really tried. But in the end, the truth had won out. His phone buzzed with a new notification. A message from an unknown number. "You ruined my life. I hope you're happy." Jason smirked and deleted the message. Yes, he was very, very happy.